is a, what type of magazine is it? Well, we fit that bill. I'll repeat this later, but when we do questions, good morning. Yeah, welcome to sunny Roswell, New Mexico. I appreciate you guys being here. I'm Guy Malone. You've seen it on the web already. There's a lot going on in town this weekend, and I'd just like to especially thank you for choosing to be at our event, because in light of the fact that you could be going to stuff that's free today, I think it just really, the fact that you've even paid here, it shows that your faith in today's speakers, even well beyond what I'm going to be doing this early session, because you've all read their bios, you've checked them out, and you actually believe that they're really going to be able to deliver some powerful information for you and very worthwhile. On the topic of today's speakers, though, I do have to warn you, in case you didn't already see this on the web, that the official UFO website, it's already posted a big disclaimer that I'm just compelled to tell you about, because I made a last-minute change on our site, RoswellUFOconference.com, but the people at the UFO Museum do want you to know, and everybody apparently, that this event that you've paid money to be at is not sanctioned by the 2006 Roswell Festival Committee. Yeah. Yeah. It is in big red letters on their website. So I just want everyone to be totally clear on that, okay? That what you're doing here today, it does not have the sanctioning of the UFO Museum. And you don't want to let them know you were here, because there could be a really stiff penalty imposed. Our 1 p.m. speaker right there in the corner is Dennis Balthaser. Is that the pronunciation key you gave me? I thought it was Balthazar. I wasn't sure. Like by the fortified moons of Balthazar. Sounds like a good sci-fi name. I don't know. But it is Balthaser. He used to be on the board of the UFO Museum and was their operations manager. So if you don't believe me, just ask him what can happen if you participate in unsanctioned activities. But and actually tonight there's also a huge fireworks display. It's sponsored locally by Church on the Move here in Roswell, and it starts at 9:15 p.m. But it's not sanctioned by the UFO Museum either. Again, according to their website, they actually tried to shut it down. In fact, just look through some recent local papers, Roswell-record.com or abjournal.com. You get more of the story on that. But just on behalf of the UFO Festival Committee, since I doubt any of them are actually here, I'd like to ask you to not look up in the sky tonight at 9:15 p.m., okay? Because the fireworks are not sanctioned by that committee. They don't want people looking at them, okay? Now, they are continuing a proud tradition here in Roswell, started 59 years ago, this weekend, in fact. Don't look up, because there's absolutely nothing in the sky you need to see. Not even those fireworks, they're not really there, okay? Well, I got all the important items out of the way. So with that, I'll ask, did anybody happen to see this idiot standing on the street corner in downtown Main Street yesterday? Yeah. That's weird, isn't it? And it looks a little familiar, but Alien Stranger, that is actually a persona I've adopted recently just for marketing my views, my websites and stuff. I actually do go out in public places looking like that. I give out cards and letting people take pictures with me. And usually I go to UFO-themed events. Not always, but usually UFO-themed events. But especially for people that are already into this stuff and interested a little bit. It can be serious topics that you deal with eventually, but this helps break the ice already, just to deal with some of these serious topics in what I think is a more lighthearted and definitely media-savvy kind of manner. One recent trip, I was in LA, and the LAtimes.com put my picture on their website and even published the URL, alienstranger.com. So no telling how many people actually got exposed to some of what you're about to hear today just from that one incident. So I'll be introducing to you the rest of today's speakers during this presentation, by the way, so I don't have to cut into their time. They're just going to take the podium themselves, and hopefully you'll be warmed up to knowing who they already are. If you paid money to be here, you read their bios anyway. So For now, we're going to do UFOs 101, sometimes subtitled, Why Should I Care? And this talk is intended firstly as an overview for skeptics, or at least for people who know next to little or nothing about the UFO and the abduction phenomena, and especially for those who don't believe that there's anything to it that's actually worthy of their attention. And you see we're doing it on DVD, so this talk is also sort of an audition tape for presenting this same lecture with other groups elsewhere sometime. And whether the group is a UFO study group or a UFO conference or even a Christian church. Because believe it or not, despite the seemingly odd subject of the lectures we're doing here, I first presented this talk at a Christian church in nearby Artesia, New Mexico. And they didn't stone me either. They even gave me a little offering after it was all done. It was pretty cool. But it won't surprise a lot of you here, I know, to hear me say that there's more than a little tension usually between much of the Christian church and most of the people that are involved in ufology. And I've spent the last few years actually kind of trying to build a bridge in that with moderate success. But I think you'll find that this talk would actually be equally suitable for either audience. Because what I mean by that is no matter what your background or your belief system is, everyone's going to hate me before this talk is over. That's guaranteed. I'm going to say something that offends you, even if I have to interrupt a speaker later on to do so. But my personal specialty or calling over the past few years has actually been more in the theological realms, but specifically biblical views of the UFO subject. And that's not the main topic of this lecture, though. And what I mean by that is that if you're not a Christian, you don't have to really feel nervous about being in the room or at this presentation, because it's not that kind of a talk. I'll be presenting the biblical material, especially in part 2, but in the context of the many views that are associated with the UFO topic. But if you are a Christian, I do want you to know you're probably going to hear some things here that you've never even considered before. A little background info on me. You might say I've been interested in the topic of UFOs and possible aliens for almost as long as I can remember. I was what you'd call a childhood experiencer of occasionally hostile nighttime visitations by my imaginary friends. So for me, getting to the bottom of all this stuff, it's never been only an intellectual question or even a philosophic pursuit or a intriguing research hobby for that matter. It really affected my life. So let's just say I had more motivation than most to want to know what the heck was going on with this phenomena. I'll totally skip all the details of that, but Come Sail Away is the book cover here on the screen. I can just hit next. Cool. Come Sail Away. That's the book cover. You can still read that online for free at seeky1.com, and that does contain some of the detailed personal experiences of mine related to the topic, kind of journal style or written, from remembered dreams or things that I believe were going on in my childhood. That's from 1997, though. And that website and that book represent my first stab at teaching or ministering in this realm of ufology. Although my views have grown a lot since 1997. It's a really good freshman effort, you might say, is how I say it. But I've let it actually remain out of print after the third printing ran out years back, just considering how much more I've learned since I originally wrote it. I said you can read it for free on the internet. But aside from that book, though, you can actually hear more about my background and my calling to this field in much more details at ancientofdays.net by clicking on the free audio link of the opening talk I gave at our conference here in July 2005. And I get a little personal on that one as well as took last year's conference attendees through a little bit of the odyssey that's been my life since 1999 when I moved from Nashville, Tennessee in Roswell, just in order to become a little more visible, a little more effective at reaching people interested in this stuff, and definitely to continue my own research. Since all that, I've opened a nonprofit bookstore in downtown Roswell, specializes in biblical perspectives of UFOs and abductions, and I've also gotten to travel to the many other UFO conferences that are held all around the country just to set up my little table. But of course, I got to listen to many excellent speakers and researchers from all over the world in that process, too. None of them are here today. I'm sorry about that. But these guys you're going to hear today are well-researched and to varying degrees prominent in this field as well. But except for Dennis, I've never even heard any of them speak. But what I'm proud of to offer at the Roswell UFO Conference is, counting me, 4 of the 5 speakers actually live here in Roswell. They've done work related to UFOs. They've got books. And Bill Line, who's from Lamy, New Mexico. So you're getting a real local flavor that you've never even gotten at one of my conferences that you can't get in downtown Roswell. So I'm actually kind of pleased and proud to offer that. But if you're just coming into all this cold, it might actually surprise some people to know that there really is indeed, there's a huge amount of information, both from credentialed scientists, there's authors, university professors, and pretty orthodox Christian researchers and ministers on the topics of UFOs and abductions. So to accomplish what's been on my heart to do the past few years, I basically just really kind of had to immerse myself in all the different sides or the views on the phenomena. And again, that's what I'm going to, as painlessly as possible, just breeze you through today in an introductory overview. And I've done talks for 4 years at conferences, interviews and stuff. But I'm kind of feel like I'm placing myself at a disadvantage on purpose when I consider my target audience, especially for DVD purposes, is people who don't necessarily believe that UFOs even exist. So normally it's before a group of what you'd call UFO enthusiasts, or people at least who are really interested in the topic, and they're knowledgeable on the topic, you know, like today, like many of you surely already are, and maybe you've even been studying the theological stuff if you're inclined to do that. But for this lecture, and again, when I first did it in a Christian church, I'm assuming that that's not true and that 95% or more listening may not be UFO believers. So that's who I've tailored this lecture to. So especially this is intended to equip you by DVD. If you've got friends and family who think you're nuts, anybody in the room deal with that thing? I'm hoping to let you be able to let them see how real this all is. And I know I've got quite a case to make in a relatively short time, though. This is information overload, by the way. I'm going to go through it pretty fast. So honestly, it's going to get a little dry in certain patches. So especially if you're watching this on DVD, I do not recommend that you drive a vehicle or operate any heavy machinery while I'm talking, okay? But like I said, at least for the uninitiated, I want to present to you that the UFO topic is real enough to deserve your attention. Hopefully, it'll spark your attention into further inquiry on the topic, and especially inquiry that's directed at the people who have been trying to keep you from finding out much of what we're going to cover here today, me and the other speakers. So I've decided that this is a story that can best be told, or a case that can best be made, you might say, mostly with simple book covers. And don't worry, I'm not going to try to attempt to give you an exhaustive summary of, we're going to see about 50 or more book covers that you're going to enjoy here. It would be impossible to summarize all those for you. What I've found actually is just that the titles and the images on the covers, and especially the credentials of many of the authors that you're going to see, they're going to make the case stupendously. I won't even have to tell you what's in the book. You won't be an expert yourself on UFOs, but you will, I believe, be convinced that there's something very real going on, like I said, worthy of attention, and if you're so inclined, worthy of theological consideration, as well as even more scientific research and public debate and inquiry targeted at those people who have, for about 60 years now, very successfully kept this topic away from the public's attention. On a serious side, I do offer a warning or a disclaimer about children being present when I conduct this particular lecture, because many of the words and themes we'll get into later are at minimum mature, although I don't particularly feature a lot of graphics of that nature. There's one you probably wouldn't want me flashing up in your church that will be on here today, but the topic does regularly flow into subjects that you might not want to have a preteen in the room for. We're at least PG-13 once you get into the topic of abductions, is what I'm saying. And I also offer a little disclaimer about my use of the term government, because what I refer to mostly for this lecture's sake, it's not our constitutionally elected officials, not the people you voted for, not who you and I usually think of when we use the term government, but more of what's referred to as a secret or a shadow government, what's probably some European-based but international cartel that appears to somehow be working behind the scenes without the consent or the knowledge of the governed. And both Christians and non refer to this as the New World Order, or the global conspiracy of the rich and the elite, and which Christians, of course, teach was going to ultimately be run by Antichrist. And just especially for the Christians who don't believe anything that hints at words like conspiracy, I thought it'd be useful here to actually show it to you in the Bible. because we tend to see the global government thing as a future event, since most of the teachings are in the book of Revelation, but it really goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11 is where most will say it had its origins, and I won't even get into that now. But here, as far as back as the time of King David, Psalm 2, where's the next button? Okay. Psalm 2 here actually teaches, the kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. So the Bible not only affirms that there is a time-tested global conspiracy where earth's various kings and rulers, note the kings, that's obviously political, rulers could easily refer to those behind the scenes. New Testament scholars might even allude that phrase to rulers mentioned in Ephesians 6:12. Now these people and these rulers set themselves, and the concordance entry for that phrase is just that they station or they position themselves, in this case against the Lord, but in unison, with cooperation and communication among each other. So the Bible not only teaches that the global conspiracy is real and has been going on for a long time, it even answers those rulers down at the bottom of the chapter, saying, be wise, you kings, serve the Lord. Can you go into the slideshow and just start the slideshow so that it's supposed to be? Yeah, can you come up and do it? I don't know how to do it. But the Bible's answer to those kings and rulers is just be wise, serve the Lord, kiss the Son, blessed are all they that will put their trust in him. So again, if you're nervous that I was going to turn this whole thing into an evangelistic message as soon as you heard the word Bible or Christian, you can relax, because I already did, and I'm already done. Just that God offers both a warning and mercy even to his enemies. So with all that history and the disclaimers totally out of the way, finally, see if I can use what time I got left. I'm going to show a series of books and some quotes that might help prove to you that UFOs are indeed a real phenomena, and hopefully why you should care. The first one, Exhibit A, I'll call it, is UFOs and the National Security State. Chronology of a Cover-Up by Richard M. Dolan, whom I consider a very excellent researcher, great intellect, a very persuasive speaker. He can be fun to hang out with too. But since this book came out, his wife's even more fun though to hang out with. She's a ball. He's constantly one of the most in-demand people as a lecturer wherever UFO conferences are held, because he holds not one but 2 degrees in history, including a master's degree and a certificate from Oxford University on political theory. And I say it that way to show you that he's not exactly what you're going to think of or classify as a UFO nut. According to his own online bio, prior to his interest in anomalous phenomena, Dolan studied U.S. Cold War strategy, Soviet history, and international diplomacy. So he doesn't sound like just another Trekkie. That's the point I'm making. He's more like a professor type, in fact. His joys in life are reading about history and politics, okay? He's an academic nerd, is what I want to drill in there. Not what you call a UFO nut, but relating just to this very popular book, the blurb on the back says, included are the records of more than 50 military bases relating innumerable violations of sensitive airspace by unknown objects, demonstrating that the U.S. military has taken the topics of UFOs seriously indeed. And when I say records, or his book says records, I'm talking official U.S. government documents that don't ever reach the newspapers, but that as an American citizen, you actually have your right to get the hands on if you know exactly what to dig for and how to ask. Rich was kind enough to speak in Roswell in 2004 at our Ancient of Days conference, and in his own words though, what brought him into this topic in the later 1990s, having no real interest all his life on it, but as a social historian, he observed what he refers to as a cultural schizophrenia, in that while publicly everybody wants to laugh at the topic of UFOs, he saw that privately many people were very, very interested in the topic. Among those who were most interested and most knowledgeable about UFOs, off the record anyway, were high-ranking military officials, even in the 90s. So as a historian, he began to document exactly how much attention various people within the U.S. government have given to UFOs and how well that interest could be documented, primarily just from U.S. government sources. Without trying to read you his whole first book on the subject, though, what he produced considerable evidence for is really, it's nothing short of astounding. The book he has produced has for many years been praised as the best, most thorough documentation of government involvement, as well as public government denial of the UFO phenomena. And it's a 500-page book, only covers 1941 to 1973. He's hammering out volume 2 right now. He's almost finished with that. But for this lecture, all I'm really going to say on his one book is, if there's any one book you really need to read to convince yourself, or even give to someone, just to convince them that UFOs are whatever they are. He doesn't even take a position, just that they're there, and our government's studying them. It would be this one book. As you see just on the front cover, don't know if you can totally read it, without even opening the book, Apollo astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell says the same thing. Thorough and monumental are his words related to Richard Dolan's book. And Mitchell, by the way, is far from the only U.S. astronaut who says that UFOs are real and that our government's aware of them. You'll note that there's a foreword by Jacques F. Vallée, Ph.D., on Richard's book under his name. That will be important as we go on in this lecture. Just keep the name tucked away. So next, we've got the book Beyond UFO Secrecy by John Greenwald, who also came to our conference in Roswell to present. The story on this book is actually more, I think, important than the book itself is, because starting at age 16, John began wondering about UFOs. And like Richard, he wanted to know if there were any true records available for an open-minded, interested teenager. And he also learned of this thing called the Freedom of Information Act. That's what I was referring to earlier. If you can pin down a place and a time, and perhaps the names of some of the people that are involved with any event in recent history that the U.S. government or military participated in, that they showed up to, or later investigated, and if you write and ask for it, they have to give you all the official records and documents that they have on the topic. Sometimes it's just one document, sometimes it's hundreds of pages though, or more. So what's funny about the documents that John was getting, that when he queried UFO reports that he knew of, this is a picture of the documents he'd be given. Yeah, that usually gets a little chuckle from people who've never seen this type of material before. John became something of a nuisance because he kept requesting these documents. Most of them looked a lot like that one there, and there's many others right in the book, but John would then scan these documents and post them on his website, the Black Vault. First dozens, then hundreds, and so on and so on and so on. Well, who do you think was happy about him doing that? UFO researchers were, but one fun part of John's story is while he was tracking down one particular report, he manages to get through to a 3-star general at the Pentagon, and when he goes to introduce himself, the general says, "Yes, John, I know who you are." You know, that's got to be a little disconcerting. You know, you're still in high school and someone at the Pentagon has your name on their lips already. But the long story short on what John accomplished here was he showed the world that yes, the military does indeed have thousands of official documents relating to UFOs, but that you and I are not allowed to know what they say. We're not allowed to actually see what's on them. The content is blacked out for reasons of national security. And John lives in LA, and by the way, if you watch these UFO shows on the History Channel in the past few years, you might actually catch that John's name appears on them, first usually in the credits, but more recently as producer for Weller Grossman working with the History Channel. So that young man has definitely made his mark on the world. One image I actually failed to copy is a video from David Sereda. UFONASA.com is one of his sites, who documents UFOs recorded by NASA cameras, which were they were innocently broadcast over cable television over about 400 hours of public access television, just the missions, what's going on live. And David clips these into a 3-hour video set, or the highlights, and he zooms you in on things that are going on usually in the background, not always. And then he comments and he reads you his email communications going back and forth with NASA officials on how they try to explain away or disclaim to him that the objects he questions them about that you can clearly see from the public video broadcasts, NASA officials are saying that they're really meteors or ice crystals. And the problem there is that you can see it on camera yourself. The objects are leaving Earth's atmosphere. They're not entering it. And sometimes they're taking hard right turns at 4,000 miles an hour. So that's not a meteor entering the atmosphere and burning up. And as you watch his video evidence, it doesn't take a big degree or even a particular hard interest in science to see that the explanations offered by the NASA officials, they just don't wash. And they they don't even believe it themselves, what they're having to type back in response to these questions. Those are 3 of the experts who came to our 2004 conference, and just watching their presentations alone, I've seen often has the effect of convincing even jaded skeptics of at least 2 things in particular. Just whatever they are, UFOs are real. And second, that the government has been covering up what they know about them for over 5 decades. These DVDs that we have, I'm mentioning, they're listed on our website on a name-your-own-price donations basis. So I don't earn income from them either. I just wanted you will hear me really pushing them, but I just want you to know it's not out of greed. We just work to get the information out there. So just let us know what aspect of this stuff you're interested in when you're on the site, and we'll send it to you. Interestingly though, on David's video, he spends about the last 20 minutes connecting UFOs, or their occupants really, to the old gods of the Egyptian culture, basically saying that they're the same entities. And he's far from the only person who says that. You know, I don't even have time to get into the 2 authors very influential over the past few decades, named Eric von Daniken and Zecharia Sitchin. You know, you've heard the names. I don't totally affirm their work, by the way, or agree with it, but they're incredibly popular sales-wise. Chariots of the Gods is an international bestseller from the 70s. I'm pretty sure over 25 million copies sold. So while I think that connection of the modern aliens to the gods of old is actually very valid, I think that these researchers are right, but sometimes for the wrong reasons. And we'll scratch the surface on all that later when we cover the biblical material in part 2. Timothy Good, Above Top Secret, the Worldwide UFO Cover-Up is the next one. Before Richard Dolan arrived on the scene, I'd have to say that the honor of the best documented UFO book, especially of government reports, went to this fella. He's a Brit, and the book covers quite a bit more documentation from different governments worldwide, not just the U.S., and he also shows how various governments have gone out of their way to suppress the evidence from reaching the public. It's a staple of UFO research, maybe not a perfect book, but it has lots that a skeptic is going to find anywhere between more than interesting and even up to very, very convincing. Go next to Firestorm by Ann Druffel. Get a lady in the mix here. Early on in the modern UFO era, there were many scientists working hard to expose the government's duplicity on the UFO subject. Sometimes the Air Force would employ non-military scientists to help them look into this stuff. But they'd make public statements very contrary to what they discovered in the investigation, and it was very rare that a scientist who was involved would actually come out and say, well, folks, that's just not true. Because there's, I think, an admirable dedication that guys like that displayed back then, like James McDonald here, because they were going against the government officials when that wasn't done. This was the 1950s, long before Vietnam, long before Watergate, long before Happy Days even. That's how far back it was. But it just wasn't unpatriotic to say that our government wasn't telling the truth. It was pretty much treason, especially by public opinion, if not in a court of law. And it really had the potential to ruin a professional or academic career as well. It still kind of does, by the way. But there's people like James McDonald, Frank Scully, Don Kehoe. These are just a few of the others. There'd probably be no real public interest in UFOs today. What I mean is you wouldn't be here today without these guys, because the government officials from the 50s would have actually succeeded in quelling public awareness of the UFO reports. There'd still be witnesses and contactees, but I really appreciate the work of someone like Ann to document his biography, and then all the early true scientists and researchers who went really against the grain of what the military was saying. Note also Ann's book, Forward by Jacques Vallée. Like I said, you'll see his name later. Now, one extremely famous and often quoted example from the 50s and 60s is Dr. J. Allen Hynek. He was an astronomy professor and a major UFO skeptic. He worked on the Air Force's Project Blue Book. And Blue Book, back in the day, that was billed as the Air Force's official channel for investigating UFO reports from the public. Say, if you had a sighting and you're a red-blooded American, you want to call up the government and report it via Project Blue Book. They'd come out and collect just the facts, ma'am. They'd investigate your claim. They'd compare it with other area witnesses, et cetera, and so on. So you could feel you'd done your patriotic duty and that your government was on the ball, checking things out on your behalf. And now the problem is that UFO researchers today know very well that Blue Book's true job was to, wherever possible, publicly debunk the UFO reports and offer any other explanation possible to your sighting, and just to calm and especially to quiet the UFO witnesses. The truth is, any UFO reports that Project Blue Book deemed to genuinely fall under national security, they were actually forwarded to a completely separate department far from investigation for cataloging elsewhere, and that's a department well beyond the scope of any public scrutiny ever. Those reports have never been made available. John Greenwald, Richard Dolan, and the well-known Roswell researcher Stanton Friedman, they can offer you more about the actual details of how that program worked. And that's really beyond what I can even begin to cover today, and they can do it much better than me. So you can hear out their lectures or read their thoughts on Project Blue Book. But just as a great idea, in what's also known as a segue, I will save you the trouble of even having to contact those gentlemen, because you're actually going to hear from retired Army Sergeant Clifford Stone. He's going to give you a very detailed overview of all those Air Force projects. Blue Book wasn't the only one. There was Project Twinkle, Sign, Grudge. Blue Book's just the one that most civilians finally came. That was the public face, but thanks to his years of research, Clifford Stone, into very hard to obtain military records, he's also going to share with you some of what they covered up, not just what they uncovered. And I don't think he's actually going to be breaking his security oath by telling us anything he actually saw or participated in while on active duty. If he does, I'm going to edit it from the DVD just for my own safety. But he's mostly going to be sharing from the famous Freedom of Information Act files that I've mentioned to you that were extremely abundant before 9/11. But anyway, Dr. J. Allen Hynek was actually originally handpicked by the Air Force to lead this team of scientists to address the public in Project Blue Book. He was picked by them because he was such a skeptic. He's the guy who actually coined that term swamp gas in one real high-profile media appearance that was used to explain away massive UFO sighting in the 60s that was in all the papers. I believe that was in Michigan. But here's the kicker. Based on the hundreds of reports that he studied over the years in his official capacity for the Air Force, the minute he was off the Air Force's payroll, Dr. Hynek became one of the most outspoken scientists who believed that UFOs were real and said that the government was lying about it all. And he very soon founded the Civilian Center for UFO Studies. He's the author of many books, like The UFO Experience, A Scientific Inquiry, which some have said is the most important book in ufology. It was written after Blue Book closed, and partly it was Hynek's rebuttal to a government report that dismissed the UFOs as hoaxes. He's been a contributor to many other books. He is the person who invented that classification system that researchers still use today to talk about UFO sightings or cases, to determine whether something, well, this was a distant sighting or a close encounter. Because you've no doubt heard the phrase or the movie title, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Hynek invented this classification system based on whether the UFO was just simply seen by your naked eye, whether it was up close. A second kind would be if it interacted physically with the environment, or if it seemed to blew some wind around, or electrical surges, mainly physical evidence. Close encounter of the third kind means that occupants were noted in the craft. They were visible entities. And after Hynek died in 1986, others added a CE4 refers to an abduction or being taken somewhere by the occupants of the craft in the CE3. And while close encounters of the fifth kind involves communication between the humans and the entities, an exchange of information, a talking, a teaching, that's a close encounter, CE5. And Hynek, interestingly, came to suggest, as a scientist, that the UFO phenomena appears to be more psychic than it is extraterrestrial, and perhaps UFOs come from, his quote, a parallel world, but not necessarily from other planets. And this is also similar to Dr. Jacques Vallée's explanation when we get to him later. But Dr. Hynek also interviewed about everyone in the UFO field back in the day. I'll leave this slide here. Just if you're a UFO aficionado, you probably recognize the names on this CD interview series he's done. But one of the people he interviewed was President Jimmy Carter, whom some here will already know went on record as saying he saw a UFO. And while I don't have a copy of anything this fellow's published, There's a well-known Canadian researcher named Grant Cameron, whose website, Presidential UFO, has articles referencing presidents back to Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower. Goes all the way back and gives us all of their combined records or interest in UFOs. You'll see in detail on Rich Dolan's talk or on Grant's website, President Truman was briefed quarterly on UFOs by General Landry, and General Landry actually told the tale in a lecture at Columbia University back in 1974, but because of the nature of the topic, President Truman wanted nothing written down, and there were no records ever kept of what he was told. He was just briefed quarterly for over 4 years. Now, President Truman's official stance to the press and the American public during his presidency was that he didn't believe there was anything at all to these UFO reports. But isn't it kind of odd that the busiest and the most powerful man on the planet for years makes time for a quarterly briefing on something which he said publicly did not exist? That's a very well documented fact, though, and I'm just hitting the highlights on it. But both Presidents Carter and Clinton are well known in the UFO field as having tried to get information on the topic of UFOs. President Clinton was actually working with Lawrence Rockefeller, big bucks, on trying to get this information declassified. And now there's a whole book of letters published called UFO Politics at the White House. Citizens rally around Jimmy Carter's promise. That's letters to Jimmy Carter from Americans thanking him for keeping his campaign promise of trying to get UFO information out to the public and just encouraging him to keep at it. But we now know both Presidents Carter and Clinton were completely stonewalled in their efforts by the military or by the Black Ops military complex, because as mere presidents of the United States, who would be out of office and regular civilians in just a few short years, they didn't have proper clearance to learn about our nation's involvement with this topic going back to the 40s. If the president doesn't have clearance to know this, though, it kind of makes you wonder who does, though, I would say. And are these people who do know this and have been cataloging it for decades, are those people subject to the will of the people? Or are they operating by consent of the governed? We never voted for them. We don't even know who they are. Now, Grant Cameron, presidential UFO, he was scheduled to speak in the U.S. on this topic at the National UFO Conference in Hollywood, September 2005. But he was denied entry into the country this time because they told him he did not have a work permit to speak at a conference that was paying him an honorarium. And that's sort of legitimate. Oh, back up. Never mind, speaking at conferences in the U.S. is something Grant had been doing regularly for years, including at the Washington, D.C. X Conference. But an interesting coincidence is that about a week and a half before he was denied entry to speak in the U.S. on this topic in September last year, the History Channel had just aired a special on presidents and UFOs that Grant worked on. I don't know if it's a coincidence or a conspiracy, who can say for sure. He's updating his visas as we speak, though, and his website contains articles dealing, or UFO briefings, inquiries, and quotes from every president back to the 40s. That's a clip right from his website. Just click a link and find out what the presidential interest and facts were for any president since Roosevelt. But most believe today that there's actually no president since John F. Kennedy has been briefed on the topic of UFOs. And he liked to talk a little too much, as we'll also learn later today when Dr. Don Burleson takes the stage. Pillow talk, even. Don Burleson, I'll just sort of introduce now, even though he's not here in the room. He's a PhD professor at ENMU here in Roswell, East New Mexico University. But he's also the head of MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, for the state of New Mexico. Actually, I'll introduce more of him later. I'm getting ahead. The thing with Kennedy, or the thing with presidents, is even when he was asked while campaigning for president, George W. Bush, he made a promise that was caught on camera by a CNN cameraman. He was asked by either Grant Cameron or Billy Cox, I can't remember, what the four-letter word was going on with UFOs. And he made a promise to try and find out and let the American people know that was actually recorded on camera. Of course, we've never heard nothing from him since, again, on that topic. But to me, that all speaks, or at least hints at, an unconstitutional form of government that is operating behind the scenes of our American democracy, making decisions of policy against the will of the people. We'll cover what is known as the topic of disclosure here in just a little bit. So hold that thought, but just for fun, you can read on Grant's website the full story of how he was treated by those tough guys that guard the American border from Canadian UFO researchers. He's got that whole story on there, as well as the official letters scanned on there. Book called Missing Times by Terry Hansen. Just for the one or maybe two conspiracy buffs that might be here in the room, this book pretty well documents that the CIA has admitted to having operatives in most of the major media outlets in the country for a variety of reasons. But the number the CIA admitted to once was 400 such operatives, working as reporters and editors for newspapers, TV stations across the country. But specific to this topic, they have a penchant for killing any of these local UFO stories, sightings, and photos before they go up the ladder to a national newspaper or media outlet. I'd love to spend more time on this topic because it's really interesting. Terry also speaks at conferences regularly, and you can get a copy of his presentation or his book. But either in print or lecture style, the subtitle of this book, Media Complicity in the UFO Cover-Up, is quite convincingly argued, whether you see him live or read the book. And finally, just for the first portion of this lecture, Jim Marrs' Alien Agenda. This is a very catch-all book that basically promotes a lot of theories that not even all the UFO researchers really agree on. And that's not to say that all UFO researchers really agree on much of anything. But like the idea that aliens had a hand either in creating mankind or tweaking our DNA from Neanderthal to Cro-Magnon. But this book is extremely important for two reasons. One, before this book, Jim Marrs earned a Pulitzer Prize for his book Crossfire, The Plot to Kill Kennedy. That book served as the partial basis for Oliver Stone's film JFK. And Jim Marrs, he's also the author of Rule by Secrecy, which covers and documents better than probably any secular book in print the pseudo-political power structures, the secret societies, the corporations, military complexes, and the small groups that seem to rule our world in secret more powerfully, and I'd say more forcefully than any government does, or at least as we traditionally think of government. So you can see Marrs, he's a very well-researched and very influential writer. High in demand and highly paid speaker at conferences like this. He's a journalist by trade as well, so he's kind of a just the facts guy. But he's also taught a college class on UFOs. There's not many people that can say that. There are a few. But the second reason this book is extremely important, Alien Agenda is also the best-selling book with UFOs or aliens in the title of all time. It's only been out since the 90s, so obviously it's been pretty influential at how a whole lot of people view the topic of UFOs. For my purposes here, just of providing skeptics materials that might prove that UFOs and such are real, this isn't the most essential book on the list, but it contains a ton of information of that type. But once you've done some other reading, it's essential for getting what you'd say is a real broad and well-researched view of some of the theories that are out there relating to who might actually be piloting the vehicles we're talking about. So there are many, many other authors and books I'd love to recommend. I'm not going to include them here. Many of whom I'm on friendly terms with, and I actually kind of feel like I'm sliding by not including them right now. But if I've really tried to present to you all the books that document the reality of the government's involvement with the subject of UFOs and that did it well, this talk could take days. We don't want that. But there's actually a list published by Fate magazine pretty recently of the 100 most influential people in ufology today. Hit up fatemag.com. You can go there. They've got archives for 2005. You'll see the special UFO issue at the top right now. You can actually access that list. A list I barely missed, by the way. I think I was 103, I don't know. But while you're on that 2005 page, I only mentioned that in fun. You can actually check out the May 2005 issue as well. That has an 8-page interview that Fate did with me and published, and you can read it for free online now too. But from a list of 100, you can see now how brief I'm actually being here with you today, even if it was starting to not seem like this was going to be brief. I'm also going to recommend you look over the website ufoevidence.org, which is a real mother lode of data, UFO photos, sightings from all over the world. It also has extremely in-depth biographies of over 100 prominent ufologists. So I'm going to move on. Along the topic of who takes this stuff seriously, MUFON. This is a cover from the Mutual UFO Network's monthly journal. Since the 1960s and the closing of Project Blue Book, the Mutual UFO Network arose as a grassroots organization to investigate UFO sightings. And now, if you have a UFO sighting, well, the government's going to tell you that they don't have any official interest in UFOs anymore. You can contact MUFON, and the odds are that no matter where you live, a trained field investigator, he'll or she will come out and gather just the facts, ma'am, just like Blue Book used to. But they take membership fees that are used to help fund the research and their annual symposiums or conferences, lectures. They have meetings in any area that they have a solid presence, which is almost every city. Roswell's not huge. I mean, there's one here. Of course, it's Roswell. But you can come together to meet and discuss the UFO topic. Now, who I said earlier, who I got ahead of myself, with Don Burleson, PhD, he's the head of MUFON for New Mexico. And at my request, a portion of his lecture is actually going to be dedicated to telling you how to go about reporting a UFO sighting, if you have one, and initiating an investigation into your sighting. MUFON's stated goal, as you see, this is their mission statement, is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. So part of why I asked Dr. Burleson to speak is to equip you to know how you can turn your sighting into something that credible people can investigate and or add to the body of knowledge about the UFO phenomenon.
Garbage. That's pro equipment for you, mate. This ain't a toy.
Live at Area 51 in Nevada. Just a fun cover. As far as collecting, though, and reporting UFO sightings goes, there's Peter Davenport and his group at the National UFO Reporting Center. It's a website that also allows you online to report UFO sightings and publishes a lot of data. Davenport's on the radio regularly on Coast to Coast AM and the Jeff French Show to update listeners on current UFO reports. Gets hundreds a month usually. The Center for UFO Studies, that's the one I said, this is a screenshot from their website. This is the group that was founded by Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the former Air Force professional skeptic. He launched a team of civilian scientists and investigators to study what the official military reports were so actively debunking to the American public. While Hynek is gone, the group does continue, also publishes both a quarterly and annual report. The image, or that was an About Us from earlier. There did exist Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, founded in the 80s. That was mainly to be the plaintiff in two famous lawsuits, one against the NSA and one against the CIA. And they tried to obtain nearly 200 very specific UFO-related documents under the Freedom of Information Act that weren't available to the public even through that act, but researchers knew they existed, so they sued the government, essentially. They didn't win, the effort failed, and the website's now more just an official homepage for Peter Gersten, the lawyer who argued these suits. It's not so much UFO-related now, but it is extremely noteworthy from the 80s that these lawsuits were filed. Before any of these groups were formed, this looks like a few people in the room here. Holy cow. No. Before they were formed, there was also the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, co-founded by Jim and Coral Lorenzen. Here's one of her books also from 1966. It's a reprint of something she originally released under a different title in '62, Flying Saucers, the Startling Evidence of the Invasion from Outer Space. The Lorenzens have the distinction of founding what is now called the first worldwide civilian UFO group to be organized way back in 1952. In 1976, the list of staff and the consultants and representatives that I found online was almost 100 people long, and it included several PhDs, including people from the fields of astronomy, biophysics, medical sciences, psychiatry, aeronautics, astrophysics, metallurgy, engineering, philosophy, and history. And these were all people who were listed as affiliated with their organization. Even back in the 70s, they were willing to have their names listed in publications stating that they were conducting UFO research and finding stuff. And it's a who's who, really, of professionals that have devoted their time to a phenomenon that most people prefer to just laugh off. But these people felt that what they were doing was something very credible and worthwhile. The Lorenzens are deceased, but according to one page I pulled offline, here's a good summary of their contribution to the field. Founded in 1952 and already mentioned menacingly by the CIA Robertson's panel in January '53, APRO collected UFO data from all over the world during its nearly 4 decades of existence. That's pretty important, 4 decades. But another book on, old book, Flying Saucers on the Attack. That may or may not be an important one historically, but it's pretty astounding that a book that was first published in 1954 could include the phrase, analyzing hundreds of reports of UFOs on the cover. This was before Project Blue Book, when people didn't really know what to do if they saw a UFO, but apparently enough people were seeing them that a single author, without internet access, could track down the stories of these people. I put it because it's kind of a fun retro cover. It's just cool to look at. There's other organizations like NICAP, Civilian Saucer Intelligence. They're worth mentioning, but I'll skip for the sake of time. But my point in really listing all these groups for you is that there's a lot of people who've put a lot of time, decades as you saw, into assembling convincing evidence on a topic that you're just not learning about from your traditional venues out there. But the information is out there if you're willing to look for it. It's obvious from the many ones that I've shown you, that these efforts go back quite a long time. So I just got to ask you, if these people weren't finding, and we're talking PhDs that, you don't go to school for 12 or 20 years to waste your time. You know what I mean? You charge for your time, you don't waste it. But if these people weren't finding anything, the efforts would have dried up and ceased, surely by now. Instead, the opposite's true. As more and more credentialed people look into the phenomena, more and more evidence for UFOs is gathered, and more credible and influential people become attracted to the field. These people are, in one sense, working against the government, and I mean the secret government, the people we didn't vote for, but they're working to bring you some information that a lot of people in a lot of dark rooms are working to keep you from knowing about. And earlier I used that term disclosure without really going into what it means. Before leaving the topic of who takes this stuff seriously, there's a couple of people I gotta mention in this field. First, Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project. It's disclosureproject.org. His name's really spelled with a V, my bad. After working in this field for years, on May 9th, 2001, he held an event at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., which ain't cheap, by the way. And you have to have a press club member, like the press corps, vouch for you and sponsor. And his press club member sponsorship was Sarah McClendon, who's a very famous White House correspondent, where in front of any press that would show up, 21 men whose careers were previously high-level military gave open testimony of their knowledge of, or at least their eyewitness accounts of UFOs. And they represented at that press club conference what the website and the book details by saying, we have over 400 government, military, and intelligence community witnesses testifying to their direct, personal, firsthand experience with UFOs, ETs, technology, and the cover-up that keeps this information secret. Only 21 of them spoke at that press club event in D.C., but they have over 400 that they've gotten on video to state knowledge of the UFOs or the technology that we've gleaned. I'm going to have to repeat this number for you for emphasis. Over 400 government, military, and intelligence community witnesses testifying to their direct, personal, firsthand contact. You ask me, that sounds pretty newsworthy, doesn't it? Did you hear about it on CNN? Did anybody in the room hear about this on the news? Not one. I'm not surprised. See the book Missing Times by Terry Hansen that I showed you earlier. This event, I'm quoting here, went on for nearly 3 hours, with each witness telling the media audience that they wanted to submit open testimony to Capitol Oath. That's Billy Cox, one reporter from Florida Today who did cover the event. But one main goal of this disclosure project is to bring this same group of men before Congress to testify that this stuff is real. And they want to hold open congressional hearings on the topics of UFO secrecy and the right to know for American citizens. And what they also claim and want to testify before Congress on is that there's tens of billions of dollars and black ops outfits that are sitting on alternative energy technologies that would end our dependence on fossil fuels forever. So guess who loses if that happens, though? Big oil. So if any of what I'm sharing with you today is true, you got to be wondering, why is it all kept secret? Why don't we know? Why won't they talk about it? Loses if we can power the planet by any other means. It's a follow the money kind of question. You follow the money all the way to your secret government, global banking, petroleum funded, military industrial complex, media conglomerate owning, and I'll add antichrist system, because that's who's going to lose if all this gets out. To be fair, there's also the argument that whatever technology could power anti-gravity, or so-called free energy even, could perhaps be very destructive if not used wisely. We all know what atomic or nuclear power can do, if it's applied for peaceful purposes. But we also know what it can do when it's given to a madman. That argument right there does legitimately put everything we've shared so far, rightfully, you could say, right under the heading of national security. Because without a global conspiracy or even a madman in the picture, do you want some 15-year-old kid tinkering around in his garage blowing up an unlimited energy source in your neighborhood? You know, there may be legitimate reasons for keeping all this out of the hands of normal people like us. Theologically speaking, there's the argument of when the Watchers started giving mankind technology back before the flood and what happened then. So I'm not to theology yet, but those familiar with the pre-flood world at least will already kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. And also very, very important to this field of disclosure, there's Stephen Bassett, who runs several websites as well as an honest-to-God registered PAC, Political Action Committee, dedicated to petitioning Congress to end what he calls the truth embargo. And he wants to allow all files related to UFO secrecy to be open to the American people. He also organizes conferences in the Washington, D.C. area with military witnesses, credentialed speakers, and other accomplished individuals. Back in 2003, he ran for a congressional seat in Maryland solely on the UFO disclosure platform. He didn't win, but he got enough signatures to be on the ballot, and that's important. But he's tireless when it comes to his efforts to get this material out to the public. His working definition of disclosure, by the way, is that inevitable, he would say, day when the United States government finally formally announces to the American people the reality of an extraterrestrial presence among us. And the problem, though, as Steve will tell you, is that they can't just walk up to the mic and say, hello, this is the president speaking. Your attention. Okay, UFOs are real. Sleep tight. And then they can't walk away from that. That might be Richard Dolan's routine, actually. But the argument, it goes, if you just announce that and you walk away, we're all like, well, wait a minute. You mean there's a foreign and potentially hostile craft penetrating our airspace routinely? There's nothing you can do about it? Well, what about abductions? Is all that stuff true? Is it true that they can, somebody or some entity can come take me, and you, as the government, can't do anything to protect me and other citizens? So that kind of throws the lid off the whole constitutional duty of what a government's supposed to do, the protect and serve kind of thing. If they begin to admit that this is true, kind of has the potential to just, throw a little anarchy or revolution type thinking in the mind of the masses, and that's not my goal. It's not what I want. But governments, whether they're secret or not, that's just not the kind of thing they generally like. It's the economy, stupid. As long as the economy's running fine, don't rock that boat. But others think that such announcements, disclosure, would lead to a certain amount of panic, religious crises, and especially more than a little economic chaos. That's also not good for a sitting politician. But still, there's plenty of people in this field who have really studied all that out, charts, trends, and all that, and they say bring it on. We can handle the truth. If the boat's rocked for a little while, let it rock, and we'll get through it eventually. But on the pro-disclosure, like thumbs up, side of UFO secrecy, despite all the cons, and there's more than you think, as a Christian, I just can't see a scenario where dishonesty is ever the best policy. Of course, you go back to those energy sources and technology unleashed issues. You can compare human wisdom either to the ancient alien wisdom or my alleged God's wisdom. That could just be the argument of an 8-year-old who thinks I'm ready to take the Suburban out for a spin. Yeah, give me a handgun, give me a car. I could handle it. I'm mature enough. I want this. It is really a tough issue to debate. I'm going to be honest with you. There's more cons than you think, and I can't come down fully on either side of whether secrecy is a good idea or not. It's not honest, but I do have successfully gotten some of these big name experts in the field, including Stephen Greer and Steve Bassett here, Richard Dolan, a couple others, to agree to get together and debate this topic here in Roswell next year at the convention center, the big one that holds like 1,000 people. They're going to present the views and debate them in conference format. So that convention center is already booked, paid for. I've got a signed contract. So keep your eyes on RoswellUFOconference.com. Join the mailing list if you're not on it. I hope to see you here next year. But what I've shown you so far are books or resources that are currently in print and that you can still get your hands on and to just check out for yourself. Going back to all these scientists and authors from the past and even into the disclosure issue, I happened to get a hold of a hardback copy of Frank Scully's Behind the Flying Saucers from the early 50s for just $30. That's a steal. And I'm going to read you just the first couple of sentences from the first pages, actually from the author's foreword, in fact. Between the people and the government today lies a double standard of morality. Anything remotely scientific has become, by government definition, a matter of military security first, hence of secrecy, not breed security, but fear. Feared and respected by many people, these anonymous creatures can deny what we say, ridicule what we say, and sometimes jail us for what we say, if our timing does not match to their their intended official pronouncements on the subject. The only way for a free people to fight such encroachments of free inquiry is to say in advance, what I am telling you will be denied. This is true, but those who say so now will be branded as dreamers, or if they persist, as liars. It completely destroys American sportsmanship standards when we, the people, stick to the rules while an opposing team of censors who have usurped our rights are permitted by their own hand-picked referee to pull rabbit punches. There's only one thing to do under such a setup: expose their tactics. Offenses are committed under the word defense, then this world dreams of. Insist that what we say is the whole truth and that what they say is not the whole truth. That was Frank Scully, 1950. That was the situation then, and that's the situation today. Hasn't changed a bit, has it? Okay, we're right at an hour, I think. Yeah, I'm on track. So I'm going to round out, don't take a break. I'm going to round out part one with the more crazy topic of abductions. And then after we break for part two, I'll begin to get fairly in depth with some of the varying spiritual views on the topics of UFOs and aliens. I conclude with an overview of Genesis 6 paradigm, a rather unique view of the Roswell incident that you won't see everywhere, not endorsed by the Hollywood, the Roswell UFO Museum, or the Chamber of Commerce. And if you go the distance and hang around with me all the way through the end of part two, I'll read from you the last page of Frank Scully's 1950 book, Behind the Flying Saucers. So the first book I want to show you on the topic of abductions is Alien Discussions. Rather large book. It is the proceedings, according to the title, proceedings of a 5-day conference held at MIT, or the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. This was an invitation-only event offered to experts in the psychiatric field and certain press. Their goal was to study the abduction phenomena most commonly referred to as alien abduction. One of the co-chairs of this event was from Harvard's psychology department and was also a Pulitzer Prize winner, by the way. Here it is. You see with your own eyes that the scientific and psychological community has managed to produce a book this thick on the topic of alien abductions. It's almost 700 pages. You don't want to drop it on your toe. But basically, several experts in this field of abduction research, I'll get to many shortly, along with experts, not UFO believers, but experts from the fields of psychology and mental health, got together in lecture discussion format. They read academic papers, they presented cases of abductees, and they heard from many abduction experiencers themselves. And they also presented research pertaining to various mental illnesses and disorders that could possibly explain away the testimonies of those who claimed such experience. And it's real important, just purposes today, to note that as a group, the researchers, psychologists, and therapists, here's my quote, ruled out delusions, paranoid schizophrenia, et cetera, as a hypothesis for most counts of alien abduction, finding that most experiencers of this phenomena were of average intelligence or higher, and no more or less fantasy prone than average. This lecture or this conference very extensively studied but ruled out satanic ritual abuse, which has many factors in common with the abduction experience, such as these hooded or somewhat disguised beings, an altar, a medical examining table, where everything seems to happen, including sexual acts. But the alien or whatever abduction experience also has enough dissimilar traits that they see it needs to be treated separately from the ritual abuse reports. I actually post the comparison table of abduction versus satanic ritual abuse on alienresistance.org. You can actually look for the comparison table that's in this book. But this big meeting also ruled out the very popular notion of sleep paralysis, aka old hag syndrome. One of the presenters there was billed as the world's leading authority on sleep paralysis, and while this theory could pertain to a few cases, both he and himself of the group, they found it to be as an overarching explanation for most abduction accounts, completely insufficient to cover the bulk of reports. They also ruled out the assumed suggestibility of hypnosis, which many others point to by saying that in such a state, certain researchers lead their patients to an outcome based on what the hypnotist wants them to remember. I'll read more on that quote there. But they also found that thousands, perhaps millions of people from all walks of life, from all over the globe, at no financial or personal benefit to themselves, and with very different media and cultural influences, who could have no way of corroborating or conspiring, they're all telling the exact same story. So the operating question that was posed by Dr. John Mack of Harvard for the conference, which received no conclusive answer, was, if what these abductees are saying is happening to them isn't happening to them, then what is? Just to unpack that question a little bit. This consortium of researchers, professionals agreed that something massive, pervasive even, is happening on a global scale. They agreed it's happening, whatever it is. They tried, they examined every other possible explanation they could think of. They were unable to provide other hypothesis that fits the bill sufficiently to explain the phenomena as anything else. The only working hypothesis that this group reached was abduction by aliens, even though they didn't say that's what we believe it is. I'm going to give you a few quotes only from the foreword of this book. The table of contents is 5 pages. But discussions of various social phenomena that seem similar in some respects, e.g. near-death experiences in Old Hag, are included in the comparison. Chapter 5 deals with a number of intellectual starting points that may have relevance to the phenomena. Some, like mass hysteria, folklore, and ritual abuse, are known phenomena with some similarities to abductions. Others, like the extraterrestrial hypothesis, are possible explanations for this phenomena. Others may treat the abductees as wonders or as future tellers. Abductees claim to have seen warnings of ecological devastation and nuclear disasters played across the face of our Earth. Because of these prophecies, many people may be tempted to ask the abductees to lead us to New Age pastures, to be our visionaries. But they can't do this. They're still working out what it means themselves. As a society, we can also treat the abductees as messengers with unpleasant news and try to silence them by branding them as crazy, and listen to their experiences, suspending disbelief if necessary to get a feel for this bizarre and amazing phenomena. The choice of behavior is vitally important to the abductees. Ours is one of the few cultures which does not openly consider spirits and other anomalies to be possible explanations for strange happenings. Since ideas are not acceptable, abductees are put under a lot of strain. First, they think they're kidnapped by aliens, then they're considered mad when they report it. Over and over, abductees state that it really hurts when the people they trust or respect say aliens are just fantasies or delusions. And the last one. It's on hypnosis. I goofed him. Okay. A more sophisticated experiment was performed in 1981 in an effort to obtain personality profiles of persons reporting abduction experiences. New York psychologist Elizabeth Slater administered 5 standard tests on 9 abductees, although she was not informed that they were such, and found them, while otherwise normal, suffering from a sense of victimization, as well as anxiety-ridden, much like crime victims or victims of natural disasters. Later informed that these individuals claimed to have been into UFOs and personally violated, Slater wrote that the psychological traits were consistent with what one might expect in the wake of such an experience. Her remarks anticipate a psychological model which would come into prominence late in the decade. The abductee would be seen as a victim of post-traumatic stress disorder. Her remarks about the subject's richness of inner life would also inspire speculation among both ufologists and debunkers that abductees have fantasy-prone personalities and cannot distinguish imagined events from real ones. This eminently testable hypothesis would not fare well in subsequent studies, such as one by Kenneth Ring and Chris Rosing, and another by Mark Rottinger, Sandra Blattenberger of the J. Allen Hynek Center. Another skeptical hypothesis that the abduction phenomena is an artifact of hypnosis. Gullible hypnotists, by asking leading questions, persuade naive subjects to confabulate science fiction tales which are assumed to describe real events, was dealt a blow. Folklorist Thomas E. Bullard, who conducted an exhaustive survey on abduction accounts in the literature, found that 2/3 of abductions recalled under hypnosis and the 1/3 recounted by those with unimpaired memory were indistinguishable. Even among the hypnotically elicited testimony, the stories were strikingly consistent over time and space, whoever the hypnotist was. Bullard concluded that hypnosis is not the cause of the phenomena and it is not relevant to it. Sorry to take up so much time with that, but this is a very important book in the field, and my reasoning here is that based on the $40 or $50 price tag sometimes, especially as it comes and goes out of print, that not many people, even within this field of ufology, have been able to give that particular book much of a glance, so I want to share a little bit from it. C.D.B. Bryan, he's your standard skeptical journalist, not a UFO believer, but he wound up on the list of invitees to the MIT conference. He's described as a skeptical but respectful in his writing on this book. He doesn't admit by the end of the book, after attending this conference for several days, that he was convinced of a nuts and bolts flying saucer explanation for these people's experiences, or if there's something else going on, but something of importance was indeed happening to a whole lot of people that could not be written off. But because of his skeptical fair-handedness in reporting on this conference and interviewing all the people involved, the book does have the effect of being quite persuasive and causing many people outside the field of ufology to take the topic pretty seriously for the first time. It's a good first book to read on the topic of abductions. Dr. John Mack of Harvard, the Pulitzer Prize winner, whose picture I had up a minute ago. First, I do want to make the point that they don't give out Pulitzer Prizes in Cracker Jack boxes. Thanks. In the words of and the 102, quote, distinguished judges who make the decision who's awarded such an honor, Pulitzers are awarded for a distinguished example of investigative reporting by an individual or team, or for distinguished editorial writing, the test of excellence being clearness of style, moral purpose, sound reasoning, and the power to influence public opinion on what the writer conceives to be the right direction. You have to really make your case, and you have to make it well, really, really well, to win a Pulitzer Prize. So I think it speaks volumes to the credibility of the many of these authors, two now that I've shown you, who are Pulitzer winners. These books that I showed you weren't the ones that won the Pulitzer, by the way. I'll be clear on that. But it does, they've lent their talents and their integrity and their reputation to the topics of UFOs and abductions, and they found that there's plenty worth investigating and plenty that needs to be told about. This book, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, details chilling, graphic stories of 13 people who Dr. Mack worked with. He eventually surmised that while the experiences were often extremely negative or traumatic, he came to believe that the experience itself was overall positive, both for the individual and for humanity in general. It forces us to to expand our consciousness into realms we ordinarily wouldn't. And he likened the abduction experience to the shamanistic experience. Some are going to say, myself included, that that's an overly positive way to cast this topic, of course, but among Mac's greatest achievements was that his work with nearly 200 abductees over more than a decade and his credentials of being from Harvard Medical School's Cambridge Hospital, he paved the way for so many others within the psychiatric field to actually listen to other people, to listen to people with similar experiences and then not write them off or just brand them crazies without hearing them out first. He also helped convince many people within the medical community that there's something going on beyond normal Western understanding, and equip them with the paradigm to help suffering individuals. Of course, his work on the topic did cost him academically. He had to undergo a 14-month inquiry while he was at Harvard because so many staff members didn't like that a Harvard staff member was doing alien abduction research and writing about it and speaking in public. But when it was all over, the dean issued a statement after all the cross-examinations for 14 months that Dr. Mack remained a member in good standing at the Harvard Faculty of Medicine and that he was free to practice what he wanted to on his own time. So, Dr. David Jacobs, PhD, did you notice that? PhD. He was also at this MIT conference. Read you his bio real quick. David M. Jacobs, PhD, is Associate Professor of History at Temple University. Dr. Jacobs began researching the controversy of unidentified flying objects in the mid-60s, has amassed over 38 years of primary research data and analytical hypothesis on the subject. In 1973, Jacobs completed his doctoral dissertation in the field of intellectual history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison on the controversy of unidentified flying objects over America. This was only the second PhD degree granted involving a UFO-related theme. So he is the author of Secret Life, first-hand documented accounts of UFO abductions, and based on over 300 accounts of abduction events he's personally researched. See his foreword by John Mack as well. But he's also the author of The Threat, revealing the secret alien agenda, which came out in 1998. Now, in case the title of this second book doesn't quite tip you off, Dr. Jacobs does not view the presence of these motivations as a good thing or as a matter of benevolence. He believes that a hybridization program is underway. That is a mixing of other entities' DNA with our human DNA for reasons that suits their purposes and not ours, which he also describes, some say pessimistically, as a hostile takeover of our species and planet. That sounds kind of out there, I know. But if you happen to have 4 decades of experience investigating this phenomena and or a PhD in UFO research, I will be happy to hear and fairly represent your thoughts on the matter here as well next time I do a talk like this. Bud Hopkins, he's one of the most noted people in the field. Similar to Jacobs, the physicality of the entities more ardently than many of those I've already mentioned. Like I said, others think it's more spiritual or psychic in nature. John Mack argued for the expansion of our definition of science to incorporate entities beyond our ability to comprehend, kind of like Vallée and Hynek from earlier, but without the occult overtones that especially Vallée came to believe. Hopkins, like Jacobs, also came to view the abduction phenomena as largely centered around hybridization between humans and aliens. Here's 3 of his books. I think he's got 4 or 5 now. Investigated well over 700 cases, heads Intruders Foundation, nonprofit scientific research support. Taken together, his books Missing Time, Intruders, Witnessed, and Sight Unseen are widely regarded by researchers and skeptics alike as comprising the most influential series of books yet published on the abduction phenomenon. That text came right off his website, in case you think it sounds biased. But it's based on a true story, you know. Reaching for Reality, 7 incredible true stories of alien abduction. Constance Clear, she was a clinical therapist. She wasn't involved in this field at all in her entire life, but as a counselor, she began hearing stories from her patients that were relating to the phenomena and just let them talk without passing any judgment. The book is noteworthy in part because rather than offer any of her opinions, she merely lets her patients tell their stories in their own words and then with their permission, she reprints them. It's also noteworthy because it has a really, really cool cover. That's very important in this field. The back cover includes words of high praise from Whitley Strieber, Dr. John Mack, and David Jacobs. She died in a motorcycle accident just a while back, and that was a tragedy because her reputation was just for being incredibly compassionate, the kind of person who's just going to lend you an ear. And skeptic or not, whether you believe in this phenomenon or not, I want Christians listening to take note of that. Just be the person that will lend an ear. But at this point, what I want to ask, similar to what I did earlier, would these men risk their good names and their careers to promote something that would only subject them to a lifetime of ridicule if they weren't firmly convinced that what they've uncovered was absolutely true? Would you? What could possibly motivate you to go on the record with material this bizarre? As I said earlier, it is professional and academic suicide, and the book sales are not worth it. Ask any one of them. They're not generally getting rich by publishing books that make the bestsellers list. The mass media doesn't even eat them up. These are research books made available for academic study. What would motivate credentialed people to publish these findings? Put it another way, for a certain members of the target audience, would 11 or 12 guys go to their deaths to promote a lie if they had not indeed stood face to face with the man that had been risen from the dead? I will not recant the story. We cannot help but tell what we've seen. That's what these authors are going through. I call this my ounce of experience is worth a pound of doctrine analogy, because Christians often relate the story of the man born blind, where the Pharisees tried to convince this guy to change his story of the miraculous healing that Jesus did on him. But whether you've experienced a miraculous healing or a UFO sighting or an encounter, just for our purposes here today, nobody's going to be able to convince you that anything other than what you say happened to you, happened to you. Nobody's going to convince you. An ounce of experience is worth a pound of doctrine. You can call people crazy, you can punish them, but you cannot convince them to recant their stories. I'd actually prefer to expound on that if I was in a church audience, but back to the subject. That's the way I put it. One of my cohorts, Doc Mike Heiser, PhD, if you're a skeptic or antagonistic, perhaps an unbeliever in this phenomenon, look at the credentials of the people that are writing these books and then tell me what it is exactly that you know that they don't. Tell me again, how many decades of actual research did you put into arriving at your skeptical or disbelieving view? Tell me again, what's your PhD in? You know, exactly how many Pulitzers have you won? Now, and that's not a bad thing. You know, we should be. We should be persuaded by information, not dogma. And it's true that the powers that be are trying to keep this information from you. But the point of the lecture and showing you the amount and quality of material that really does exist on the topic is I want you to be an honest skeptic. Don't simply refuse to read books like this and then still turn around and boast that UFOs and all that's just a bunch of baloney, and then ridicule people who do believe in it for one reason or another, whether research or experience. Read 4, 5, 6 of these books. Get back with us on your skepticism. Just don't be an uninformed skeptic either. Be an honest skeptic. Dr. Carla Turner, I'm going to go over. I think we're already past 9:30. See someone looking at their watch. The second one is actually going to be shorter. Dr. Carla Turner, PhD, without a doubt, she's one of the most respected researchers ever, even if you hated what she had to say. She died at a young age, about a decade ago, from a particularly nasty form of cancer. Many may have been the side effect of her abduction experiences. Some in the field think that it was given to her somehow because the powers that be wanted to shut her up. She also went against the grain of most UFO researchers from a decade ago by quite often challenging the extraterrestrial hypothesis during her lectures at UFO conferences, and especially by telling people that what was going on was not a good thing. Plus, she had stories both of her own and other abductees tying in certain secret militaries to the abduction phenomena. But as a PhD university professor, her research was impeccable. Her words usually rang of truth, even to fans of the aliens. Her books are all out of print, very expensive to get a hold of. So this is that's a DVD we offer, and that's an old VHS lecture she gave in 1994. Go to alienresistance.org and you can get that DVD there. You'll see this picture. But you can go to carlaturner.org. And you can watch this video for free, and you can also read PDF versions of all 3 of her books for free, and watch the low-res version of this video. This is one of her books. If you watch the Sci-Fi Channel often, now you know where Steven Spielberg got the title of the longest and most expensive miniseries in history. Longer than Roots, longer than North-South, taken by Steven Spielberg. But this is especially the part where those with children might have to excuse themselves. I'm going to offer you just some quotes from her research. Aliens can alter our perceptions of our surroundings. Aliens can control what we think we see. They can appear in any number of guises and shapes, can be present with us in an invisible state and make themselves only partially visible. Abductees receive marks on their bodies other than the well-known scoop marks and straight-line scars, single punctures, bruises, claw marks. Female abductees often suffer serious problems after their alien encounters, and sometimes these problems lead to cysts, tumors, and even hysterectomies. A surprising number suffer from serious illnesses they didn't have before their encounters, led to surgery, debilitation, and even death from causes that doctors can't identify. Often they encounter more than one sort of alien, not just grays, gray, reptoid, insect, blonde. Abductees report being scoffed at, jeered at, and threatened by their alien captors. Painful probes are performed. Unknown fluids are injected into some. Some report being taken to underground facilities where they see grotesque hybrid creatures, nurseries of hybrid humanoid fetuses, vats of colored liquid filled with parts of human bodies. They often report seeing other humans being drained of blood, mutilated, flayed, dismembered, stacked, blah, blah, blah. Some have been threatened that they're going to wind up too like this if they don't cooperate. They come into homes and temporarily remove young children, and when the parent actually protests or is able to communicate, the aliens say that your children belong to us. They have forced humans to have intercourse with the aliens and even with other abductees while groups of aliens observe the performances. In such encounters, the aliens have sometimes disguised themselves or shapeshifted in order to gain the cooperation, appearing as Jesus, the Pope, certain celebrities, and even the dead spouses of the abductees. They perform extremely painful experiments, saying they're necessary, but they won't say why. Painful probes are performed on children as well as adults. They make predictions of an imminent period of chaos and destruction, that some humans will be rescued from this, but even the abductees aren't believing the story. They think there's a much more sinister use of the rescued humans, the ones who don't come back, would be another way of saying it. In every instance, there's multiple reports from these cases. The middle of the page here, before we allow ourselves to believe in the benevolence of the alien interaction, we should ask, do enlightened beings need to use the cover of night to perform good deeds? Do they need to paralyze us and render us helpless to resist? Do angels need to steal our fetuses? Do they need to manipulate our children? And are pain, fear, and deception consistent with high spiritual motives? Okay, well, that's kind of a downer, I realize. But honestly, those are the details, exactly what the very best research into this phenomena produces. My Labs, Military, Mind Control, and Alien Abduction by Dr. Helmut Lammer and his wife Marion. I did mention Dr. Turner referenced covert military agencies seemingly behind some of these abductions, whether that's a suitable explanation for all accounts or whether it's just a case of humans re-abducting people previously taken by non-human entities and then perhaps pumping them for intelligence on those other entities and then giving them false memories to make them believe done by aliens is quite a quagmire of conundrums wrapped around a mystery and hidden inside of a riddle and all. But Lammer's book actually does document for those that want to look at that side of the possibilities of a cover-up going on. And I'm not saying it's even a U.S.-based cover-up. It's just a covert op by some military forces. That might sound far-fetched to you, but let me read you his bio from the back of the book. Dr. Lammer has a Ph.D., there's that annoying word again, in geophysics and works at the Austrian Space Research Institute as a planetary scientist on various space projects. Published many scientific papers in prestigious scientific journals, blah, blah, blah. Member of the European Geophysical Society and the New York Academy of Science. Again, a highly credentialed individual dealing with a subject that most people are afraid to take seriously. Despite all that, sometime after this book was published, he just dropped off the map. I tried contacting him in 2003 to speak at our 2004 conference. Every email address I've ever found for him failed, bounced back, or didn't get answered. No one in this field that previously corresponded with him has been able to give me any new contact info for him, and I've been trying for years, and that's including MUFON, and he was previously listed on MUFON's website as their rep for Australia, or Austria. It's even crazier, while I was trying to find him, I realized the book was already out of print. It goes as high, it's $250 on Amazon last time I checked. And no, you cannot borrow mine. But someone told me, even though I've not been able to verify this, someone told me that the publisher of the book was killed in a car wreck soon after the book came out. I cannot verify that. I've tried. But the website for the publisher has definitely disappeared. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, yeah. Either Dr. Lammer's disappeared, or at minimum someone scared him enough that he won't respond to inquiries on this. So when I told you of Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project, I do want to add here that his view of abductions, aliens, is that it's all MILAB related. Greer will almost say that there aren't bad aliens doing this. He has a very convincing article on the subject, Greer does, on his website. Keep in mind that Greer is very pro-benevolent aliens, here to show us a better way about this topic, though. He leans more to a spiritual interpretation of their purposes for being here, kind of in a new agey way is what I'm implying. He doesn't agree with or affirm anything that puts UFOs or aliens in a negative light, but even if that is his motivation, the article is very convincing, because what he's saying is that these secret government types are trying to paint the aliens as evil in order to justify huge black op defense budgets and maintain martial law over the citizenry when the aliens become real and everybody on the planet knows about it. It's very Hegelian dialectic, if you know what I'm saying. While convinced